Yes, come in. How's it going? Hey, just turned 16, looking to get my license. Perfect, absolutely. Take a 6-week program, driver's ed. If you miss a class, that's fine. Just have a teacher or parent sign off on your absence. Pass the written and physical test, flying colors. Make sure you study up on traffic laws and street signs to be well prepared for being on the road. Oh, do you have your permit already? Yes, but I've only had it for 4 months. Gotcha. So once you have your permit for 6 months, then you can get your license. After all this, then you can get your driver's license. Oh, one last thing. After you get your license, you can only drive your siblings and immediate family for the first 6 months. That way you're not driving friends around and being reckless. Ah, come in. Hey, just turned 18, looking to get an assault rifle. Do I need to sign? No. Do I have to, like, take a class? No. It's optional. Can I buy a handgun? 3 more years. We can't be.
So this TikToker by the name of Hunter Kaimi points out the absurdity of gun laws in the United States. Now, it's pretty obvious if you look at things like driving, which is to say, if somebody's operating a motor vehicle, it's a pretty potentially dangerous object that somebody could be controlling. So, of course, we have rules and regulations in place to make sure that people know how to use it, that people are familiar with safety protocols, and that there are some decent restrictions in terms of age and when and where people are allowed to use them. But with guns, it seems that there's not the same rules in place. Now, despite the fact that the Constitution says well-regulated militia literally within the words of the Second Amendment, many Republicans don't seem to care, and many states have in place gun laws that are incredibly lackadaisical. And in fact, gun laws, to a certain degree, have gotten increasingly lackadaisical over the past 40 years. But behind that phrase, well-regulated militia, I think there's some importance to understand the historical context of the United States, how it came to be, and why a lot of the arguments tend to fall flat to the conservatives that want to have increasingly liberal gun laws. So let's think about it for a second. The reality is that well-regulated militia originally existed to protect the rights of slave patrols to exist. Now, when we understand that, then all of a sudden, a lot of things start to become more clear, especially when we consider that gun rights were very much used to support the rights of white slave owners and white folks in general to engage in lynch mob, which is why historically within the United States, there have been gun laws, but that were designed specifically to restrict access to guns among marginalized people, especially indigenous folks, but also Black Americans and other people of color. The reason why this is relevant is because it speaks to something that I think goes deeper to the history and nature of the United States itself, that I think a lot of Democrats are unwilling to accept. And that is the reality that the United States was fundamentally founded on white supremacy. So when we see today, we have a rampant problem of gun violence, but we also have a rampant problem of terrorism from white supremacists and vigilante violence from white supremacists. Then we can understand that this is not something that is new. This is something that has always been part of the American system. And when we understand how right-wingers talk about the Second Amendment, they are talking about, in essence, the spirit of the law as opposed to the word of the law. Because the reality is, gun laws in the United States, historically, even recently, were largely meant to disarm Black Americans and to arm white Americans in such a way that is a baseline encouragement for the vigilantism that was used to prop up the incredibly racist system of the United States of America. Just look at the existence of sundown towns and the fact that they didn't reach their peak until the 80s. This doesn't speak of an ancient history about the United States, something that's long gone by. This is something that people who are alive today very much live through and very much carry along with them in their assumptions about what gun laws are for. This is not ancient history. This is probably your grandparents' history, depending on how old you are. Not to mention the fact that segregation itself is actually getting worse in the United States. If you look over the past 30 years, neighborhoods and schools and workplaces have actually been getting more segregated. Now, this isn't segregation through the law, but it's segregation through the actions and decisions of private actors. That is to say, largely businesses. So why is it so easy to get a gun in the United States? Well, the reality is a lot of suburban Americans have this deeply ingrained gun culture. But that deeply ingrained gun culture, especially this right-wing fantasy of somehow at the same time being John Rambo, but also at the same time defending yourselves from invaders coming into your homes. That type of fear-mongering, which has very clear and obvious racial underpinnings behind it, is used to instigate this vigilantist violence. And it's one of the reasons why this is such a uniquely American problem. But it's also one of the reasons why Republicans don't want to put any restrictions whatsoever on access to guns. But the problem with the proposals that Democrats are putting forward, for the most part, fails to acknowledge the true history behind guns in the United States. And when it fails to acknowledge that, then you can realize how the implementation of gun laws ends up being biased and still reinforces this. Even to this day, gun laws are largely used to stop people of color from getting access to guns without stopping a lot of white folks from getting access to guns. And that imbalance is something that creates a very dangerous environment, especially with so much extremist racism in our country. And when you put on top of that a racist policing system that doesn't really have any interest in policing white neighborhoods, then we can understand how even well-intentioned regulation might not get the enforcement that is necessary in order to deal with the problem of guns. All this is to say is that this is an incredibly complicated situation where we want to keep our communities safe from guns, but at the same time, what we don't want is racist police to only take guns away from marginalized people while still letting these extremist white supremacists continue to have access to guns. And in order to deal with that problem, that means we actually need to look at our police departments and start to get white supremacists out of police departments and start to demilitarize and disarm the police. These things are all very complicated, but they're not impossible. But if we don't recognize the white supremacy at the root of American gun laws, then we are going to continue to live in a world where teenagers can buy assault rifles and commit mass murders on a near daily basis, which is fundamentally unacceptable.